right? Self-discipline. A lot of people undervalue self-discipline. You're so straight and always doing what you want to do. But when you think about it in a different sense, self-discipline means what? It means you are controlling the one life that you have to live. And then the follow-up question is, if you're not controlling that life, who or what is? And
Hmm.
why would you allow something else to control the one life you have to live? What a waste.
Bill, welcome to the show.
Oh, hey, it's a pleasure to be here.
How did you come to write about Stoicism and the good life?
Long story, but here's a short version of it. Apparently, when I turned 50, I was having a mild grade midlife crisis, and I decided I was going to become a Zen Buddhist. So, I mean, I got to Stoicism through Zen Buddhism, which sounds like a paradox, but um, I started reading about Zen Buddhism, and it dawned on me that I could actually not only satisfy my curiosity and deal with this midlife crisis, but at the same time, I could get a publication out of it. And being a college professor, you always try to get two for the price of one. So if I could get a publication, that would be great. So I decided to extend this into the book that ultimately became the book on desire, why we want what we want. But to be complete, I needed to show what the alternatives were to Zen Buddhism. So Zen Buddhism, in one way you can construe it, it's a philosophy of life. What is the grand goal in living and how best to attain that goal? And so I thought, well, what are some other viewpoints on that? Well, Stoics offered one, and I started looking into them. I had actually encountered the Stoics, but doing logic back in college, not in the philosophy classes I took back then. This would be in the 1970s, because my professors said, no, it's not the proper business of a philosopher to concern himself with how to live a good life. It's about all these timeless issues that we've been talking about for 2,000 years. And you know what? We're so close to the final breakthrough when we finally figure this out. So that's not what the Stoics were about. But if you want, you can study their logic. And they were in the first century AD. They were the prime logicians of their time, and they were very good at propositional logic, which is what makes modern computers and your cell phone work. So it dawned on me once I found out more about um, Stoicism that I actually, first surprise was they are headed at approximately the same grand goal in living, and that is a life that's full of, to the extent possible, of positive emotions like delight and even joy, and relatively without negative emotions like anger and anxiety and regret. And but where they differed is they had two radically different strategies for pursuing that goal. So if you want to become a Zen Buddhist, you spend a lot of time meditating. And as a result, and I believe this is true, as a result of that, you can reduce the number of negative emotions you experience. But it's a long-term project, because when is that going to happen? Well, maybe tomorrow, or maybe in 30 years. It could go either way. Whereas the Stoics said, well, we've got some basic psychological strategies you can put to your work in your life. And these aren't obscure things. We can explain them to you in a matter of minutes. You can test drive them with no one being any the wiser. And if they make a difference, great, they can transform your life. And if they don't make a difference, well, then go back to Zen Buddhism. It's a strange research project. I went in thinking I was going to come out a Zen Buddhist and came out a Stoic instead. Then, really thinking, this is wonderful stuff, I've got to share this with the world, I decided to write a book, Guide to the Good Life, which I imagined would sell maybe 12 copies total, with 6 being purchased by friends who might or might not actually read it. But it turned out that we're in the midst of a Stoic renaissance, and I caught it in the early stages. So the world has changed on that, and I think that's a change for the better.
I have so many questions to follow up on, but I think before we dive into some of the nuances and details here, it's probably wise to start with what is Stoicism?
Okay, Stoicism is philosophy, ancient philosophers. First Stoic was a guy named Zeno of Citium who lived in 300 BC. He wanted to become a philosopher, and back then there was no such thing as academic philosophy. So what you would do is you would create a philosophical school, and then you would have students in that school, and presumably, it was like a school of martial arts. You attracted students, and they were paying students, and that's how you made your living. He also did what modern martial arts schools do, and that is you can have a pure style of martial arts, but you can mix together different schools and come up with your own version. Zeno of Citium did basically that. He found a few schools. He tried a few schools on his own. And then he thought, I think I can get this interesting hybrid that's got some logic in it, got some advice for living in it, got this whole notion of being able to communicate well, got some science in it, this whole batch, and I can have my own school. So he started a school. This was in Greece. And unfortunately, most of the things he wrote and his subsequent Greek Stoics wrote have been lost. But the Romans took it on and put their own spin on it. So the people you normally think of as Stoics are Roman Stoics, most famously, top four. Seneca, who's currently my favorite, but ask me next week and I might have a different favorite. I'm very fickle about that. Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Musonius Rufus. And the interesting thing is, if you say, well, what did the Stoics say? Well, I've just named four of them, and they actually can have interestingly different spins on the questions you ask. So it's a diverse kind of philosophy with common themes running through it.
Where do those four tend to diverge?
Well, you can find the greatest divergence is between Musonius Rufus and either Seneca or Marcus Aurelius. So Marcus Aurelius would have been, he was the emperor. He would have been vastly wealthy, vastly powerful. Seneca was counselor to an emperor, but he was also the greatest playwright of his time. He was also the first century AD equivalent of a billionaire, and he was a Stoic. At the other end of the spectrum, we find Musonius Rufus, who basically said, "You know what? If you can give me a cave to live in, that'll work. That'll do it for me." So he was a minimalist kind of Stoic, and you can have the whole gap in between. I guess one thing about the Stoics is if you a Stoic will tell you, what do you need to drink? A Stoic will say, well, water's fine. It satisfies the need. But if you handed a Stoic a glass of really fine wine, he would probably say, oh, sure, I'll drink that. And then if you said, okay, no more wine, he said, okay, he would say, okay, do you have some water? Because I'm thirsty right now. So it's that notion that you enjoy what life has to offer, but without becoming addicted to it, without clinging to what life has to offer. You're always prepared for things to take a turn for the worse. So, the people, the preppers, these are the people who stockpile food and everything else in case things take a turn for the worse. Um, and they always have their day, like at the start of COVID, where everybody else was scrambling for toilet paper, and they said, here's my supply of 4 years of toilet paper. And they look really good. And the rest of the time, we all just say, oh, these people, they're so foolish. But the Stoics can be regarded as emotional preppers. So, what were they doing? They were preparing for things to become dramatically worse. They were preparing to lose the things they value in life. And that can sound like a really negative approach to things, except that they had the insight that if you do that, then you'll be profoundly grateful for whatever it is you do have in life. Because otherwise, you're just going to take everything in your life for granted. But if you appreciate what you have, you can savor it, you can embrace it, and that raises the possibility of you experiencing joy in your life.
I want to come back to this idea of emotional preparedness at some point, but I think these people sound almost superhuman, right? Like the ability to just go with the flow always and always be prepared and always be ready. And no matter what happens, you just have this sort of, we would call it a stoic sort of way about you. And for many of us that's who suffer from variations in emotions, maybe, or not suffer, that's part of the spice of life, but for many of us who have more difficulty dealing with that, it sounds like, oh, I could never do that. Did they always practice what they preached? Is this like a binary thing, or is it a gradient?
Okay, to begin with, we what we normally call Stoics. These are people who don't experience emotions, and when life does something brutal to them, they just suck it up and stand there and take it. I call those the lowercase s Stoics. That's the common conception. The Stoics themselves were remarkably um, well-adjusted people. They were known to those who they lived with as cheerful individuals because they weren't anti-emotion. What they were out to do is minimize negative emotions. And they weren't
Hmm.
out to stifle negative emotions. They were out to prevent them from happening in the first place and to nip them in the bud when they did start to arise. Positive emotions, they were connoisseurs of positive emotions. And some of the greatest emotions you can have that can be everyday experiences, but you kind of got to open your mind to them. One is feelings of delight. You walk outside, there's the sky, it's blue. It didn't have to be blue, but it's blue. And it's a beautiful shade of blue that will change from hour to hour within a day and will change from day to day. And it didn't have to be that way. So, you can either just say, yeah, it's a sky, or you can say, no, look, see what there is. It's a sky. Same thing with feelings of awe. So you can experience awe. Usually requires a little bit of effort on your part, but I've described this in one place where uh, you know, I can be walking along and pick up a rock and then realize, you know what, this rock, in fact, right here where I live, found a rock, and I was I was freaking out because the rock was actually a fossil that was 400 million years old, because the place where I now have my home used to be under an ancient sea that was the source of this fossil. So, the people who are watching me freak out were thinking, well, he's got a rock. Well, it can be a rock, but it can be impressively greater. Just a wonderful thing compared to that. So, and also the things that are part of your everyday life. Um, if you look at your life from the point of view of your ancestors, you're living in heaven. You're living in a dream world. Well, what do I mean by that? Do you have running water? Do you have a toilet? Do you have toilet paper? From their point of view, you've got in your pocket a little device that you can order pizza in Hong Kong if you wanted to. Yeah, you do. And what do we do? Oh, you know what? I don't have the latest model of that phone. Man, if only I had the latest model, I would be a happy person. But I don't. And boohoo, pity me, everybody. Look at what I lack. So the Stoic insight, one of the Stoic insights, is that much of our unhappiness is self-inflicted. It's a question of your state of mind. It's a question of you framing the things that happen to you in a way that makes them not just more tolerable, but where you can actually extract delight from them.
Let's take a little sidetrack here on that sort of hedonic treadmill that you brought up. Why is it that we think that something is going to make us happy, and then when we get it, we just immediately almost take it for granted? We're on to the next thing. We're always chasing something else.
We're wired to be that way. So by wired, I don't mean wires, I mean neurons, but we evolved on the savannas of Africa, 200,000 to 70,000 years ago, rough numbers. And the ancestors who were alive back then, who were easily satisfied, dropped out of the gene pool. Imagine that you had an ancestor. Of course, he wouldn't have been an ancestor, but imagine somebody back then was the ultimate cool dude. And while everybody else was walking around worried about lions and worried about where the next meal was coming from, he was there on the savannas of Africa, looking at the blue sky, thinking, "Isn't it all just grand? I'm going to stay in the moment." Well, he stayed in the moment for a moment, and then a lion ate him. I don't know if that's how he perished. And when mealtime came, he didn't have food prepared. He didn't have food, some source of food. So people who were easily satisfied dropped out of the gene pool. Now, the
Mm,
people who were constantly thinking, not about the present, the people who weren't in the moment, but the people who were constantly thinking about the past, about things that had happened so they could learn from them, and the future so that they could control that future in a way that would benefit them. Those people who were not satisfied, who always wanted more, were much more likely to survive and reproduce, and therefore much more likely to be somewhere in your family tree. So to be dissatisfied was had survival advantage. But we live in a dramatically different world than those ancestors did. And we have food. Food is not the problem. The problem is overeating. We have the opposite problem. Material possessions. Think of it. Their possessions were limited to what they could carry, and they didn't even have like big cooler chests, and backpacks and everything else. I don't think they did, that they could carry. And so it's basically what you could carry kind of on your person and in your hands, and that was the
mm.
limit. And we have now just places where you can stuff them with material things. And but we're wired. Once we get something, we just raise our standard. We say, okay, I've got all that, and that's nice, but if I only had, and then you fill in the blank however you want. If I only had such and such, then at last I would live happily ever after. So we're like thirsty people chasing mirages in a desert. We work so hard to get to that seeming pond off in the distance, only to realize it's a mirage. And then we go to the next seeming pond.
Why do you think there's a Stoic renaissance now?
I don't know. And like I said, so this would be in the 1970s. I was a philosophy major, but the only place I encountered Stoicism was in a logic class. So philosophers lost interest. I mean, there were classical philosophers who didn't, but most of philosophers would have said that's just not an appropriate thing for us to be thinking about. There are more important things to be thinking about. And so it's a curious thing, but it had survived. You can find examples of philosophers starting in 300 BC all the way up to the beginning of the 19th century, and then suddenly they drop off. So when I published a guide to the good life, so I told you that the I had very very low expectations of how a guide to the good life would do, because and these were reality based expectations. I looked on Amazon and I could find a handful. I could find books written by the ancient Stoics, translations of those books. I could find scholarly books written about the ancient Stoics, but there were only a handful of books that were written about Stoicism for general audiences. And I think it's because people just didn't know the Stoics were out there. And I think that
Mm.
most college professors wouldn't stoop to writing a book that would reach a general audience. So there were a handful of books when I published it. It got off to a very slow start, but started picking up speed. And Last year, I gave a talk at the Stoicon convention. There are now enough of us that we can have global conventions, and I did some research. And at present, there are books on Stoicism written for general audiences coming out at the rate of more than one per day. So
Mm.
it's just this incredible transformation. I can give you the reason why Stoicism is popular, and that is because it's very hackable. And I hate the word hackable, but it's hackable. It gives you specific psychological techniques that you can use to change the way you're living your life. There's a handful of these techniques. And these aren't obscure things. They're easy to learn, easy to try. So it's got a very low price of admission compared, for instance, to Zen Buddhism. So people try it and they find it works. And then I guess the word spreads, but it shows signs of picking up speed, if anything. And it's undergone in the last 20 years this huge change in popularity.
Well, let's talk about some of those specific techniques. How do we train ourselves to be more stoic?
Okay, my favorite beginning technique on Stoicism is what's called negative visualization. And if it's okay, let's take 2 minutes to go through an actual
Yeah.
exercise. This is 2 minutes that could change your life, or maybe not, but we'll see. So, negative visualization. Step one is you think about things in your life that you rely on. Think about the things that you experience daily. And this can be the people in your life, this can be your job, this can be your health. And these are all just things that are there and they've been there for a long time. And so you being a human, you just start taking them for granted. Okay, so negative visualization says once you've found your thing to think about, now I want you to imagine that you don't have the thing that you take for granted. So, for instance, you can imagine it can be a child in your life, it can be a spouse or partner in your life, it can be your job. So, I want you to imagine, just give yourself a flickering moment to fill in the details that that person or that job or that thing is suddenly gone. A more concrete way, here's something you take for advantage. This is if you're a sighted individual, and that is your eyesight. So here's a concrete way to put this. Okay, so close your eyes, and I want you to imagine that. So just think of what that would be like, and I want you to imagine that that's all you would ever see. That's it. Here's a twist that I put into this exercise. So you don't dwell on these negative things because that would be a recipe for a disastrously suicidal life. But now, in a second here, I'm going to ask you to open your eyes. But I want you to imagine that when you attempt to open them, that they're somehow glued shut. So go ahead, but they're glued shut. And you realize you can never open them again. Now, give yourself a second to let that soak in. Now, open those eyes and take a look. Isn't that absolutely incredible? And yet, 2 minutes ago, it was something you took utterly for granted. And your life is full of things that are like that. Your sense of balance, your ability to walk, your ability to breathe without needing without needing an oxygen tank. You can go through things. You're one of the luckiest individuals ever to inhabit the universe. And yet, if you have the wrong frame of mind, poor, pitiful me, somebody feels sorry for me, look how terrible it is. It's a mind game. It's a psychological technique. And now, again, I don't encourage people to dwell on losing things. So it's a flickering thought that you have, and you can fill in some detail on that flickering thought. So imagine that you've lost your job. Uh, then you allow yourself to kind of think about that for a sec, fill in some of the details, and then snap out of it and go on with life. So I do this on a routine basis about any number of things, common things, and my wife knows I've been doing it because she'll hear me yell out from the back bedroom, "Thanks for existing," and she'll know that I imagined her suddenly being absent from my life. And then it all rushes in. Oh, wow. That would be a huge loss. What does that mean? That means I've got something really wonderful. And what am I doing? Well, I'm a human being. I'm taking it utterly for granted. Or, in a worst case, I'm just sort of saying, yeah, this is fine for now. But if only I had, and then you're on that hedonic treadmill. If only I had something better than that, that would do it for me. Um, but we're human beings. That's just part of the experience.
So negative visualization is one technique. Are there other popular or effective ones that are equally valuable?
Yeah, another one is the dichotomy of control. So Epictetus is normally identified as the source of this psychological insight. The dichotomy of control, which I have transformed into the trichotomy of control. So it says, look, there are things you can control and things you can't control. And I've actually put it into three different categories. There are things you can control, meaning you have almost complete control over. Things you can't control, meaning you have no control at all over, and things you have some but not complete control over. So that'll be that middle category. So I'm putting a spin on Epictetus here. So what are the things that you can't control? Well, if an asteroid hits the Earth tomorrow, hey, that's you can't prevent that. You can't stop that. What are things you can control? You can control the values you pick for yourself. You can control the goals you pick for yourself. You can, with a little bit of effort, control how you respond to the challenges life presents you. So I've used the example of a tennis match. So suppose you're scheduled to play a tennis match. And so a Stoic would say, okay, so what you want to do is you want to think about the three elements of control here. You can't control how hard your opponent trains. You can't control what strategy your opponent uses. You can't control how hard your opponent plays. But what can you control? Well, you can control how hard you practice. You can control the strategy you use going into the game. You can practice, you can work on your conditioning. So, what do you need to do? You need to focus your attention on the things you can control. And sometimes there's very great degree of control, and sometimes there's moderate degree of control. But that's what you should be thinking about, because the things you can't control, you're just wasting your time because you can't control them. You can't affect them. You can't change them. So to spend your time and energy worrying about them is a waste of your time and energy. And it's a profound insight. Some people are anxious, some people are not. But the people who are anxious, often it's because they're concerning themselves with things they can't control. And so, an important insight. So, focus your attention on things you can control. And I mentioned that among the things you can control are your values. So, what is it I want in life? What do I value the most? You can pick that, you can set that, and then develop a strategy that'll get you to the things that you value the most.
I remember having a conversation with one of my friends a few weeks ago, and they were focusing on something they couldn't control. And even though they recognized that they were focusing on it, they couldn't really stop focusing on it. Is there a way to
Yep.
get that out?
Yeah, I'm a practicing Stoic, have been for 20 years, and you're always practicing in two senses. That is, you're making it a part of your ordinary life, and you're working to get better, the way you would practice, playing a flute or oboe or something if you were a kid in school. And so I have noticed this in my own life. There are things I will toss and turn at night. As a Stoic, everybody does. You know, you'll have some intrusive thought that you're trying to fall asleep, or you wake up in the middle of the night. The intrusive thought says, "Oh, he's awake. Okay, here we go. We're going to party in his mind." And then the question is, what do you do about it? And it's really interesting. When you become a practicing Stoic, then you get upset at a whole other level. I call it meta anger. So you're angry about something, but as a Stoic, you're angry that you're angry at it because you realize that as a Stoic, you've let it get to you. It's under your skin. And and it really is an interesting and challenging thing. I've decided that there are people to whom I'm simply allergic. It's a kind of a psychological allergy, and that they know how to get under my skin. I can have any number of techniques. You know, standard technique is that's just Bob being Bob. That's just what Bob does. And I'm working with that. Check with me again in a few years, and I'll tell you about that particular experiment. The thing is, you know, and because of COVID, people were locked into small spaces with people perhaps not of their choosing. So you had roommates, and you know they said, okay, you really can't go out except for groceries, so you're stuck with these roommates. Imagine that you're locked into an apartment with two roommates, one of whom has anger issues, one of whom is an emotional basket case. And so the one who has anger issues keeps coming in and nudging you. You know, that guy who said that thing about you the other day, you should be really angry about that. If I were you, I would be so angry about that. And then the emotional roommate will come in just as you're trying to fall asleep and say, you know, I'm worried about such and such, and I think it can affect you, so you should be worried about that too. That would be a terrible situation to exist in, except your actual human situation is even worse than that. Because there, you knew the COVID was going to come to an end and you'd get out of this apartment and so on, but you are locked inside your skull with these two roommates for the rest of your life. So you have systems within your brain that respond with anger to whatever to bad things that happen. How come? Because your ancestors who were very angry, for instance, when something happened to lessen their social status, they survived and reproduced. Those who just took it in stride, oops. Same thing with the emotional aspect of it. And you're wired to have those feelings. So the next step, strategy for dealing with them, is number one, to realize that's what the game is. You're locked into the skull with them. So in my most recent book, The Stoic Challenge, I describe what I call the 5-second rule. So within my mind, I'll notice that something has happened, and I'll notice the earliest signs of anger, just little smolderings of anger. And then my theory is I've got 5 seconds to reframe that, because otherwise, once the anger bursts into a flame, it's going to be there. And you know, it's a strange thing, but you can talk to people who have lost most of their memory, older people, you know, demented, and you know, they don't know what day it is, they don't know what season it is, but they can tell you in graphic detail about something that happened to them 40 years ago that was upsetting. So anger has that power over us. So what you do is you try to take incidents that could make you angry and you frame them as a kind of a test, that it's a test of seeing, hey, can I work around this? Can I repackage this in some way where it's not going to trigger those feelings that are going to wake me up in the middle of the night? And there's this whole notion, and in the book, Stoic Challenge, the title says it all. So we treat these episodes as challenges and we deal with them as such. We say, oh, it's a test. It's a test. What do I have to do to pass this test? Two things. Number one is I have to find a successful workaround to the setbacks I experience. I have to get out on the other side. And number two, and even more important, I have to not let myself get out of control and angry and upset while I work around to the other side. Because if you think about the things, the setbacks you experience in life, usually the setback is going to harm you, but usually what harms you the most is your response to the setback. So I use the analogy of a broken water pipe, right? And that's a setback. If you discover that you have a broken water pipe in your house, that's a setback. But that can be cured quite easily. You have a plumber come out, and for a few $100, it's all fixed. Ah, what causes the harm is not the pipe itself, but the flooding water emitted by the pipe, which can cause all sorts of damage. It can cause ceilings to collapse. It can flood basements. It can do any number of things. Same with you and your setbacks. The setbacks themselves can be tiny little things, like somebody making an offhanded remark about your appearance or about something you did. And then, so that's the setback. And then what does the harm is you dwelling on that, you tossing and turning on that while trying to sleep. That's the real damage. And that's an important insight that it's self-inflicted harm. When setbacks hurt us, most of the harm is self-inflicted, and it's us letting that flood of negative emotions take us over.
I don't know if you're like me at all, but you're an author and you put out work publicly, and so people comment on that, and forever you might get 1,000 positive comments, but they don't stick in your mind at all. It's that one negative comment that seems to stay with you.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Let me tell you something else that's happened. I've done a bunch of these Zoom speeches and Zoom interviews and so on. And what I found is you can do it in such a way that people can chat while you're giving your talk, and then you have the option. You can see the chat, or you can not see the chat. And at first I thought, oh, the chat is a really good thing because you've got instant feedback. And you know, the weird thing about giving like a Zoom talk is you'll tell what you think is a really, really great joke, and there's no audience response because you can't hear their
Right.
end. And then you're thinking, was it a bad joke? Did they just not get the joke? Um, but the little chat stuff that went by, I finally decided, number one, it's distracting, and number two, I would see one negative chat and then spend the next 7 minutes of my speech,
Yeah.
trying to respond, trying to work around it. Praise, I tend to shrug off. I'm pretty good about shrugging off praise. I will, if I get a positive email, I will thank the person who sent it. Um, but Stoic is going to be very picky about praise because there's some people. If I designate somebody a mentor and they praise me, that's cause for celebration because the mentor is the person that you've said, you've decided this is a person who really understands something. So when they're talking, I'm just going to shut up and take notes. I'm not going to try to correct them. I'm going to ask lots of questions, but I'm going to take notes. And if that person says, you did X and that's a good thing, wow, right? That's great. But praise from a variety of people, I don't know. What are their values? In fact, I have this concept of an anti-mentor, and that is there are people who, if they praise you, it's a sign that you're doing something very wrong because they have such different values than you do. That if they think you're doing the right thing, whoa, hold on, you've got to correct that. Now with social media, and I have as little social media in my life as I can, but you see the effects of that, and that is people can now react to praise from complete strangers, thumbs up or becoming a follower. And it's a metric, and you can check how it changes from day to day. And the thing is that you don't know who these people are, and yet in many cases, uh, it's possible for a person's life to be taken over by the praise or criticism of complete strangers whose values you don't understand and might not even agree with. So it's really risky, and there are people who can do that. I've certainly seen people who don't even look at their Twitter feeds. They just dump stuff because there's going to be so much stuff, and that's maybe the healthy way to proceed. But I know I would read them, and I know I would react to them. So I don't want to expose myself to that risk.
Well, I like how you shape sort of the environment to meet your needs and understanding yourself in that context. I'm wondering if you can go a little bit deeper on the concept of an anti-mentor.
Anti-mentor, and again, a mentor, and you can have. I guess you could have a life mentor. I don't think I have. I think if Seneca had been around, yeah, he would be a life mentor. In fact, in the day, as a kind of a guiding technique. Sometimes when I'm really stymied, I will ask myself, what would Seneca do under these circumstances? If I'm lying in bed, I ask myself, what would Marcus Aurelius do, right? And he famously said, is it my purpose here to lie and keep warm under these blankets? No, I have a social duty to go do things. So there are people that I would give blanket mentor status too. Normally, though, it's a limited status. So I row competitively. I scull, more precisely. That's with two oars rather than one oar. And there have been people I have chosen as rowing mentors. And so what they tell me about rowing, I take very seriously. And if they criticize me, I take that very seriously. I don't get hurt feelings, but I know, oh, great, here's something to work on. If they praise me, that's great. So that would be a limited mentor. And I have multiple limited mentors in my life. And the danger is that you think you don't need mentors, because that means you think you know everything. And that's a really bad state to be in. So an anti-mentor is somebody that I've had a chance to observe, to get to know, and have drawn the conclusion that they're playing a radically different game than I am. So there's one game, the social status game. There are people who live to create a certain social impression. So they buy a car, they dress, they buy a house, they do all of that. That's not the game I'm playing. I'm playing a radically different game. And so when they look down on me, I think, oh, that's a good sign, because they're playing a different game. And for them to win their game, what I'm doing would be craziness. It'd be like bringing a hockey stick to a baseball game. Just that would be absolutely crazy. So if they criticize me, I perk up a bit. Oh, good. I'm not playing their game. I don't want to be playing their game. I think their game is kind of foolish. Not that I'm going to tell them that. Guess what? That's how they feel about the game I'm playing. So that would be an anti-mentor. There are also people that I've decided I'm simply allergic to. And so then, one thing you can control is your exposure to various people. And if there's a person who's not doing you any good and doing you harm, and you are consciously going out of your way to expose yourself, well, then it's on you. Now, in other cases, you have relatives, you have coworkers, and so on. You can't quite do that. But yeah, so this notion of people who are just have different values or are having a different game for them to approve of you is a bad sign.
The only thing I might add to that is people who aren't in the arena or haven't done what you're trying to do. So it's easy to be a critic these days. You can sort of sit in the stands and watch anybody try to do what they're trying to do and, lob these grenades at them. But if you're, the way that I think of it is if you're not in the arena with me or trying to do what I've done or have done what I'm trying to do, then those comments are generally speaking misplaced and don't add a lot of value to the conversation. What's your response to that?
Yeah, the whole notion of failure, well, to criticize other people is now frighteningly easy because social media has made it possible to anonymously criticize other people. There was a time when I was a kid when you had your neighborhood, and if you wanted to spread a bad word about somebody, you would have to do it either verbally to somebody's face or to people who knew them, or I don't know, mimeograph papers and put it in people's mailboxes, and
Yeah.
people very quickly would have found out who it was. And the interesting thing is, whoever you were attacking would be very angry at you. But the people who saw you attacking him would be thinking, you know what? He might be doing that to me when I'm not around. So there was a price to be paid for being negative in that way. But now you can do it anonymously. And there are people who that's how their meaning of life is. I'm going to be outraged. And when somebody is attacked, I'm going to pile on. And, that for me is a good day. So let's see, I piled on to 18 different people today. Yeah, I've earned my beer tonight. I've earned my keep here. Here's another wrinkle on that, and that is the notion of failure. I happen to be a big fan of failure. Don't get me wrong. I don't like failing. I don't go out of my way to fail. But I know that a capacity to fail, in some sense of the word, and the Stoics had their own kind of conception of what it was involved in failing. For somebody to fail is actually an interesting sign, and for somebody to fail in public is an interesting sign because what is it an indication of? One of the things is that they're trying to do things that for them are hard. It's an admirable trait that some human being is trying to do things that are hard to do. And if they really are hard, you're going to fail. You're going to fail. Sometimes you might fail a lot. And if you never fail, you might say, I've never failed. And then the Stoic response is, well, do something hard then. Well, the things are easy for me. Well, then switch to something that will be hard for you to do. So I told you I'm a competitive rower. So I oftentimes do not place well. The interesting thing is when I don't, then the question is, so did I fail? Well, actually not, because one of the reasons I row is it's part of my Stoic training. Stoic training involves doing something that's very hard to do, running the risk of failure, doing something that's going to activate. Remember, we talked about the roommates
Mm.
that you're trapped with. If you're rowing a race, those roommates, when you're two-thirds of the way through the race, they come out and they haunt you and they say, Bill, wouldn't it be nice to slow down at this point? Why not quit altogether? So you get to grapple, mano a mano with those voices, and you get to tell them to shut up, and you get to push on to the end. And I think you're a better person for having done that. And so if I come in last place in a race, which has happened, the interesting joke in rowing is, somebody tells you that they took first place in the race they were in. And then if you want to be snarky, the follow-up question is, oh, did you have any competitors? Because it can often happen, that you're the only boat if you're in an age category group of a certain weight class and so on. Um, but when I come in last, so from that metric, yeah, failure. There are people who came in ahead of you, but no, I was playing a different game. Yeah, I know I was playing the rowing game, but I was playing a different game, and the game is number one, not to be afraid of failure, to go
Mm.
out there to grapple with these voices in my head, and to do the training, the physical training necessary to be out there doing that. And there's a background kind of thought of, yeah, you know what? I may have come in last place in that race, but I beat the approximately 7.5 billion people who didn't even show up at the starting line,
Yeah.
which is something to be proud of.
When you were saying that, it brought to mind, I often go for this 10-mile run where I go out 5 and I come back, but there's a point at about 3.5 where I can take this shortcut and I can get home in about 9 instead of 10. And I've found through trial and error that it's much better for me if I'm going to give up to actually walk the full 10 than it would be to take the shortcut, because I took the shortcut once and I've only done this once ever, but it took me 3 months because every time I passed it on the way back, it became
Yep.
harder and harder not to take the shortcut after having done it once. So it's better
Oh,
to
yeah.
just sort of like stop and walk the rest of the way if you don't want to run, but don't take the shortcut.
Yep, giving into those voices encourages them hugely. You know, they live in the back closet of your mind, and they're always trying. But you give them one big success, you know, where you actually do quit, and it's like giving them superpowers. You know, it's like you injected them with adrenaline or whatever, because after that, they're gonna own you. Um, so there are times when I do quit. There are times when and I'm not proud of it when it happens. I'm a human being, but to wrestle with them, you know, to wrestle with them, you're going to build up your sense of I can control aspects of my life. Self discipline, right? Self discipline. A lot of people undervalue self discipline. You know, you're so straight and always doing what you want to do. But when you think about it in a different sense, self discipline means what? It means you are controlling the one life that you have to live. And then the follow up question is if you're not controlling that life, who or what is? And
Hmm.
why would you allow something else to control the one life you have to live? What a waste.
That's a really good way to put it. I want to come back to the people that you're allergic to. What's the thought process that you go through before you remove them from your life?
Well, once you've realized that somebody has the ability to get under your skin, and you know, I don't even think that they think of it in those terms. And so the best way to think of it is that's just them doing what they do. I think there are people who are allergic to me. I don't know who they are. Maybe they're dodging me. So that's kind of how it goes. And so what is it that they're allergic to? Well, it's something about my personality. It's something that grates against their personality or their values. And uh, you know, relatives, you don't get to choose. And if you have relatives, it's wonderful if you can get along with them. You can work at getting along with them. But sometimes the best solution for all parties involved is you just keep your distance. And if they come up and start doing their normal act, then you just remind yourself that's just what he does. And this sounds cruel, but he can't control himself. That's just
Hmm.
who he is. It isn't cruel, though, because that's how you are. There's just things that you do because they just feel like the right thing to do. And so that's how you behave. But that whole notion of he's just him being him, you know, that's what he does. I'm not there yet. I'm working on it. Again, get back to me sometime in the next decade, and I might have the final solution there. But it really is tricky. So we human beings, we're social animals. We need other human beings around us. I call it vitamin P. People. We need that contact, and you're going to be very unhealthy if you don't get that contact. The problem is people are just so difficult, right? They can't see things your way. They can't bend over backwards for you the way you're sure you're bending over backwards for them. So can't live with them, can't live without them. But hey, welcome to the human experience.
How do we go as parents about teaching our kids to be more stoic?
I used to think that Stoicism was philosophy for older people. In particular, really old people, people facing near death. I thought that though that's the primary target for them. But then at age 40, you know, or age 50, I discovered it myself or stumbled across it myself and realized, no, it's not for old people. And I have had numerous people write to me and say, what about kids? And the more I think about that, the more I realize, for instance, your teen years are just a prime time for you to develop Stoicism, because that's when you really have to deal with your fellow human beings up close. You can't uh, you can't get away with them. You're stuck with them. You encounter them every day, and then you can have Stoic coping strategies that you can use. So I haven't given it a whole lot of thought. I'm aware that there are some people who have, but just the whole notion that kids are a prime candidate, and other things like being grateful. And you have to be careful. You'd have to package it with kids in mind. But here'd be a great example, and that is kids can be very insulting. Stoic number one strategy: how to respond to an insult. Make a joke out of it. And in other words, turn it around. So if somebody insults you, so here's one turnaround. If that's the worst thing that you have to say about me, you really don't know me well enough to be insulting me. You should really put your attention somewhere else. But that requires a little bit of thought and a little bit of presence in the aftermath of being insulted. A better way to respond to an insult is with no response at all. So somebody says their insulting remark, and you just carry on having whatever conversation you were having. And the interesting thing is, and you can watch this happen. So I wrote a book on insults called The Slap in the Face. So this was a follow-on book to um, A Guide to the Good Life. And um, to say nothing at all. So you watch what they do. And it's
Mm.
really kind of fun because at first they'll be kind of wondering, did he hear me? I just insulted him. Did he hear me? And you let them stew like that. And then with luck, they'll repeat the insult, at which point you say, yeah, I heard you the first time. And then you just go on with your conversation once again. It requires very little effort on your part, and yet it's a knockdown punch because here they are hitting you with their best shot, and you aren't even hearing it. So a better way still would be to slip into a coma. I mean, if you went up and were insulting a person who was comatose, man, you're an idiot that you would be doing such a thing. But what you do, it's the ultimate put down of, what, you can say what you want. And it's just words. It is simply words. And uh, go ahead. Now, the thing is, you are wired to care very much about insults because, again, on the savannas of Africa, if you allowed yourself to be insulted, you lost social status, meaning you were less likely to eat, you were less likely to mate. So it's wired into you. And I remember being a teenager. What a troubling time of life. You felt everything deeply. So there should be a Stoic answer to that, but I haven't experimented deeply with that.
Talk to me about the psychological immune system.
Psychological immune system, the biological immune system, of course. In order to be healthy, your biological immune system, you have to expose yourself to germs. I'm going to use germs in the broad sense, but you have to expose yourself to germs and foreign bodies for your biological immune system to be healthy and active. So there are these cases, like the case of the bubble boy, who doctors early in his life figured out that he had no immune system. He grew up in a bubble, literally a plastic bubble with filtered air, meaning no human contact, meaning none of this. Was doing okay. And then when he was 10 or 12, I forget the exact time, but he got a bone marrow transplant from his sister, thinking this will cure it. Unfortunately, she had some one germ lurking in the bone marrow, and it killed him. It killed the guy. So I have a relative who's actually a pediatrician, and I asked him about the immune system and how you should respond to that with respect to kids. And he said that the official medical advice is a kid should eat a pound of dirt. And that's not literally a pound of literally dirt, but to be exposed to to germs. Growing up is a very healthy thing because you'll have a healthy immune system. And a kid left to his own devices will do strange things, will suck on the remote control for the TV, will taste the dog. If you have a dog, will do these things. Biological immune system is a similar kind of thing. And that is that if you lived in a psychological immune system is a similar thing. If you lived in a psychological bubble, that is in an environment in which you never had challenges, in which people never insulted you, in which it was just always smooth and easygoing, when someone else took care of whatever bothered you, you would be like the bubble boy. And as a result, as soon as you were exposed to psychological challenges, you would crumble. They would seem like major, major incidents. So I worry that we live in a time when a lot of people are in, to some extent, one of these psychological bubbles, and we're protecting them from being exposed to these irritants. And we want to help them. We're trying to protect them. But it could be, I think, if you traveled the Stoics forward in time to today, they would say, what they need is just a kind of a more challenging environment, and then they will be able to cope with the challenges they experience.
What's the Stoic advice on decision making?
Stoic advice on decision making is you fragment it into the part you can control and the part you can't control, and you focus your attention on the part you can control. And of course, they were also logicians. So, there's a very rational way you can go about making decisions. Number one is you map out your options. So I'm actually at work on a project right now where I go into that in greater detail. Mapping out your options, there will usually be the obvious thing to do, which might not be the optimal thing to do. And so, one thing I tell my students when I teach critical thinking is it's very important that you invest quality time into thinking about what your options are. And that can involve a degree of brainstorming, because it would be there's no guarantee you're going to pick the optimal option. You can put all the thought you want. But one thing's for sure, and that is that if you don't even consider the optimal option, there's no way you can pick it. So that notion of, okay, control things that you can have control over, or worry about things that you can have control over, and spend active thought laying out the options, because there can be multiple options. So my wife and I, when we're trying to decide, whether to go somewhere, what to do when we get there. I mean, she knows. Maybe this is a source of irritation. I don't know, but where I will lay out, I'll say, okay, well, here's a bunch of different options we have available to us. And so for me, that's just second nature. You actively think about options, and some of them can be way out there options because you never know. And then you choose among those in a rational way.
I like expanding the options for sure. Can we talk a little bit about the tension between being skeptical and being open minded?
Yeah. So right now, the project I'm working on is about being simultaneously skeptical and open minded. And I think that's the key if you want to be a person whose mind is full primarily of true and useful beliefs. So imagine somebody who is open minded but not skeptical. Before you knew it, their mind would be full of conspiracy theories and all sorts of strange stuff, because there'd be all sorts of ideas flowing in without filter. Okay. Now imagine the opposite of that, somebody who is skeptical, highly skeptical, but not open minded. So that person would end up basically with true and useful beliefs, because that skeptical guard would only let those in. But there'd be all sorts of other beliefs that are both true and useful that he simply wouldn't open himself to. And we have this psychological phenomenon called confirmation bias, which unfortunately, left to run, will make us more and more closed minded. Confirmation bias is when you believe something, you start looking for evidence that what you believe is true, and you start ignoring evidence that what you believe is false. So you can imagine it like dropping a little one crystal of sugar into a super saturated sugar solution, and that one tiny little crystal will grow into a massive crystal. That's how it is with your beliefs. So a little tiny belief can get into your mind, and once it's there, it can grow until it becomes a major obsession. So the trick, if you want to have a healthy mind, is you're simultaneously not only letting new ideas in, but exploring new ideas. One of the new ideas is that many of your old ideas are mistaken. That's a sign of open mindedness. If you sort of acknowledge, yeah, a bunch of what I believe right now, those beliefs are mistaken. Things I was told when I was a kid wasn't true. Things my tribe believes they aren't true. And so one thing you will do is you will reach out to intelligent, articulate people on the other side of the debate, and you'll listen very carefully to what they have to say. You'll talk to them not trying to refute them, not trying to disprove them, not trying to show your mastery, but to learn from them. And then the follow up thing a lot of people say at that point is, well, in this particular debate, there are no intelligent, articulate people on the other side, which I should add is a sign of closed mindedness on your part. So then you're precisely the person who needs to seek out those people, because almost invariably they're out there. Almost invariably, you can gain something from talking to them.
We talked a lot about Stoicism. What are the other competing sort of philosophies of life?
Well, there's one, the skeptics, there's the Epicureans, there are numerous schools. These were schools in ancient Greece. So they had it was like schools of martial arts, right? So if you wanted to start a school of philosophy, what did you have to do? You had to have a formula, and then you had to gain students. And so it's interesting. But there was an ongoing business of creating philosophy schools. And you kind of had to come up with you capture one corner of the market by coming up with
Mm.
one particular way of thinking. The people who went there, some of them came for self improvement, but parents would have sent their kids there so they could gain skills that the kids could use in their adult careers. So there might be politics, so you learned logic, you learned speaking skills. Might be the law, so you did that. So it was very much unlike in modern times academic schools of philosophy, and these would be departments of philosophy in universities. um, I don't have to attract students. They have to take me,
Right.
that's just the way it is. But then you realize, gosh, what would it be like if I had to have a product that students and their parents said, okay, you got to do this. You got to take this guy because he's going to give you some very important insights about something. And in fact, most of my students, if they weren't forced to take my classes, would not take my classes because they're in it for a career. And there are people who are interested in law or politics who actually take philosophy. So it's curious. We still have that aspect going. Um, so the books I write, so I regard myself primarily as a teacher. So, well, actually, a three word description of me: I'm a husband, father, and teacher. Professionally, I'm a teacher, and I regard my teaching as having two forms of outreach. I teach in the classroom, and I teach through publications. And I'm one of the luckiest people alive in that I get paid for thinking about things I want to learn about and then sharing what I've learned with a broader audience. And I regard it as a wonderful form of teaching. I reach a whole lot more people than I do in the classroom, and I get emails from people. So it's very it's wonderful to be changing people's lives. And if I'm changing them for the better, that's better still, right? But that I'm reaching an audience, that's wonderful.
How do you want to be remembered?
Father, Husband and teacher, that would do it. So on my tombstone, if I have one, I would actually like to be describe this somewhere. Composted down, spread in a tomato garden, and be served as a tomato salad on some fine summer day. But if I did have a tombstone, husband, father, teacher would be the three.
Thank you so much, Bill. This has been a really great conversation.
Oh, thank you. I've had fun.